The first duty of government is to protect our rights.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government in what we were tasked to do.
In the Idaho Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, we have a right to life, we have a right to defend life.
This legislation is centered on meeting the needs of Idaho families.
And we have no way to maintain control over the spending of this program, and it will be a disaster for this state long term.
But we have a whole gamut of kids whose parents would like to do something for them and they cannot.
The courts have long held that our ability to transfer title on real property benefits society as a whole.
This is simply about putting it out of reach of young, innocent, vulnerable children and making our libraries and schools a safe place for them to go.
And I am increasingly frustrated that we cannot stop ourselves from drinking at the public trough.
He's sounding the alarm. He's saying if we don't address these issues, we potentially might have greater problems moving forward.
I feel like we're back to an unappointed board that gets to decide who is essential and who is non-essential.
If I was looking at a business and I was looking at these figures, there would be heads rolling because this is unsustainable.
We're supposed to be bottom-up government. We're supposed to be representing my citizens' ideas and your citizens' ideas, and we're supposed to be discussing them and debating them to come to a conclusion.
And for me, it's about a couple things. It's about food security, it's about national security, and it's about preserving American exceptionalism.
The First Amendment and our freedom of religion, freedom of speech are our first liberties. They are so important. We don't have the rest without them.
Good morning. Welcome to Idaho Signal, January 25, 2024. My name is Matt Edwards, and the Signal is broadcasting. We are awaiting a decision about this budget process that we've been talking about for the last for this past week here, the last few days. We're still trying to figure out if they're going to go with it or not. We're very hopeful. Things are looking good, and but maybe we'll have some updates during the show because nothing definitive has been made yet. No decision has been made definitive yet. So we'll keep a tab on that. In the meantime, we're going to go over some polling numbers. BSU, the Boise State University, for the past 8 or 9 years has been conducting what they call this sort of Idaho-wide get a sense of what the folks are feeling about political issues, social issues, economic issues, the direction of the state, if we're headed in the right direction, in the wrong direction. And they've been doing this for a while, and it appears that when these results come out, that there is a sense that this is what everybody believes, and then the political winds sort of shift in that direction, and a lot of these polls get referenced as the means, the reason why we're going. They're doing what we're doing. Sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied this morning, but we'll get through it. But I'd rather just, instead of analyze it here ourselves, I wanted to bring in Brandon Durst, who is a former legislator in Idaho, and among other things, the man gets involved in a lot of good things in the state for our values and such. And so it's a pleasure to bring Brandon on here to dive into these numbers. Brandon, welcome to the program. Can you do a better explanation than I did on what this what the intent of this survey is for?
Sure. So just as Matt, thanks for having me on. Just as background, I ran a public policy survey research company for a long time. In fact, my former business partner, Greg Hill, was the first person at Boise State to start this survey in his position as the director of the Policy Institute at Boise State. This was his survey to start off with. And so we've been following this for a long time. This survey is intended to kind of get a snapshot of where Idahoans are on any given issue that's facing the state. and we can get into more detail about why this misses the mark and why it's really not a reliable measure for policymakers or for the public to look at when it comes to where we are in terms of our feelings and attitudes towards certain issues.
Yeah. Okay. So then, why don't we dive into what BSU is and whoever does the poll for them or with them, who are they reaching? Who are they reaching out to? Because when we think of polling, we think of presidential polls and election polls, like who are the voters, who are the people on this side, on that side, and where the sense is. So give us the sense of who these people, what we're reaching here.
Yeah. So that was actually one of the areas that I first identified from the methodology standpoint that was particularly concerning in this particular survey. Most policy surveys look to ask questions of at least registered voters, people who have the capacity to impact, our republic through their vote. And oftentimes that's narrowed down even further to people who are likely to vote. This survey didn't do that. In fact, this survey did something that's quite unusual and frankly probably it was absolutely not best practice, and that is that they questioned anyone who was living in Idaho. They didn't look at whether or not someone was legally allowed to be in Idaho. You could have people that were illegally in Idaho and they could be participating in this survey. They could be a college student that happened to be living in a dorm in Boise or in Moscow or someplace, but be a resident of a different state. They just said, are you living here? And that is problematic because it doesn't really represent the people that are helping make the decisions and elect our folks for our republic to make those decisions on our behalf.
Okay, and it looks as though they polled around 1,000 or so people.
Yeah.
Is that generally a good number?
That's actually about twice as high as you really need to be for a statewide survey. There's a thing called the law of large numbers. Basically, the more respondents you get, the less likely to impact the outcome you are. And really, in a statewide survey of registered voters, that number is around 450 total respondents to get, what would be considered the industry standard of 5% margin of error, plus or minus, with a 95% confidence interval. That's about 450 is about where you hit that point in Idaho surveys. With 1,000, that's a lot. But if you're polling the wrong people, it doesn't matter how many of them you poll, you're still getting bad data.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Well, with that being said, one of the top line questions that they asked was the direction of the state. Where do you think our state is moving in the right direction or the wrong direction? And depending on where you are in your own life, sometimes that's what really dictates it. We see here for the first time that the wrong track has overtaken the right track. And the unsures have increased over the last 10 years or so. But what can you tell us about this question? Let's dive into this one.
So just from a really high level, I don't like questions like this because they aren't particularly meaningful because they don't explain, at least initially, they don't explain why. Now, they did dig deeper. They said, well, why is it on the wrong track? And I think that's pretty illuminating related to the respondents that they're getting, which I don't think are representative of the Idaho electorate. But
right. Let's bring. I think we have that slide. Let's bring up that. Why do you think we're going in the wrong direction? And we can look at that. What those respondents said. The number one here is too conservative or a Republican majority. The cost of living, Californians coming in, politicians and leadership, or it's too liberal, or it's becoming too liberal. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel attacked. But, the thing with these questions is that, we always tell clients, when you ask a question like this, what do you want to know? How is it actionable? This isn't an actionable question. It is what it is. But I think at the end of the day, it speaks to the fact that this poll probably isn't representative. And it also, it says, what about it being too conservative? Clearly the Democrats are saying this is why, right? They don't like living in a state that's conservative. Well, great. But if you're not a voter or, that is what it is. So
right.
I'm not sure how useful it is.
Well, then conversely, for the folks that thought we were headed in the right direction, what I found interesting here was that the top two actually kind of confirmed. The top one also confirms. The top three actually kind of confirm each other, right? I mean, we are conservative majority state, so people overall love the state, love Idaho.
Yeah.
The conservative, that we're a conservative state, was number 2, and also the leadership in politics, which is conservative and Republican, I guess you could say. I mean, all those 3 kind of like line up there, right?
Yeah, and that's where you see this divergence in the opinion of the respondents. But
yeah,
again, I'm not a huge fan of this sort of right track or on track question, just because I don't think it's particularly illuminating. Although I do appreciate that they kind of delved down a little bit to figure out why.
Right. Okay. I want to take a short break and come back and let you take off on some of your other findings and what you think is important about polling in general and this kind of poll here. So stick around, everybody. We'll be right back.
There's a saying in Idaho: Esto perpetua. It is forever. But the truth is, nothing lasts forever. Not without a fight. The Gem State is ours to fight for. It is ours to win. For life and liberty. For honesty and integrity. We ride together.
Okay, we are back with Brandon Durst, who has been a figure in Idaho politics for many, many years now. No stranger to reading the tea leaves, listening to the people, and seeing the direction that things are going. And so we're diving into the BSU Idaho poll. And Brandon, I want to just kind of let you riff off here on a little bit of what else you're seeing.
Yeah, so there were a few questions that I thought were particularly interesting. And let me just preface this whole thing with, I don't think these numbers are reliable. So leave that out of the way. We can get into the weeds of some of these questions. One of the questions that I thought was particularly interesting was the question around Idaho's abortion laws. And the reason I thought it was interesting was, for number one, as a survey designer for survey research, we're taught to try to make questions as simple as possible because respondents get tired. It's called respondent fatigue. And they lose track of things if they're too complicated. And if you read the question, which is here on the screen, it's a very complicated question. Not only is it complicated, but it's also wrong on the law. Idaho law currently says that all abortions are illegal, except for in the cases of rape, incest, and the life of the mother. That's not what this question asked. You'll also notice that the respondent options, none of them included saying something around the law being too weak. They really led the respondent to a given outcome rather than allow the respondent. I really prefer a Goldilocks type question where you say it's either a little cold or a little hot or just right. Those types of questions on an issue like abortion are better because they allow us to be able to have a sense of what people actually think. This sort of listing out a respondent option, none of which actually represented a conservative perspective, I think is problematic.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying here. It says currently in Idaho, abortion is banned after 6 weeks of pregnancy. But you're right, that's not entirely true right there.
I mean, it is the case that abortion is banned after 6 weeks.
Sure, but it's also banned after 4 weeks. It's also banned
after 1 day. Right?
Right.
So it's a bit of a misleading question. And I think that the reason they wrote the question that way is because there's this, within some circles of those that think that we should be able to murder unborn children, that the 6 weeks ban has become the boogeyman in a lot of national discourse. And so being able to insert that into this question serves as a signal to respondents on how to respond. And you're not supposed to do that. There's an organization called APOR, which is really kind of the national organization that tells market researchers how to structure questions and things like this. This falls, clearly out of balance with their recommendations.
Right. Okay. All right. What else stuck out for you here?
So another question that I thought was interesting was the question around education freedom. Obviously, being an education freedom guy, that would be an issue that I look at. But I think that the problem, this is about how you. This goes to how you present a question, right, or how you present results. They presented it as this percentage of people don't want education freedom. Well, you could have very easily said this percentage of people are unsatisfied with the status quo, right? Because actually, a majority of people, if you sum those that support ESAs and those who aren't sure, that number is greater than 50%. But that's not how Boise State chose to frame the response. They chose to frame it as these people that are unsure aren't supportive of education choice. Well, that's not what they said. When you ask somebody to give when you give a respondent the option to say they don't know, which you should almost always do, as again one of those A4 standards within survey research, it means they don't know. It's not, you're not supposed to ascribe a perspective, but that's what they did. And the reason they did that is because it runs counter to the narrative that people don't want ESAs, tax credits, those sorts of things. And because the question was written like, this is going to take money away from your public school. Do you actually like this? And people were like, and more people said yes than said no. And that's really the story. Again, I think that if the survey had done a proper sampling methodology, which is how you find out who answers the questions, if they'd done that better, you would have seen that number on education choice even higher. And given the fact that this survey had a disproportionate number of people that self-identified as liberal or moderate relative to what we know the electorate to be, I mean, I think that goes to show that this survey not only is it not reliable, but if it had been reliable, the numbers on things like school choice would have been even higher.
Yeah, that's interesting. The I don't know option, if I were to ever answer a question I don't know, it's because I'm saying to myself, oh, I don't know about the issue, or I haven't looked into it, or I haven't thought about it enough, so I don't know. I don't know what I think. And you're saying they're ascribing that to taking a position.
Yeah, and in fact, what we know is men, unsurprisingly, Matt, we don't like to answer don't know to questions. The survey research bears that out time and time again. Men, in a statistically significant rate, answer questions and don't ever shoot and opt not to use the don't know response, even though they don't know, because we like to pretend like we know everything. Women are much more likely to say they don't know something. And that bears itself out in these survey questions. And the other piece of that is being able to give respondents the opportunity to refuse to answer a question, which is something that you should also do. And again, if somebody refuses to answer, that doesn't mean they're a yes or a no, or they feel one way or the other. That just means they're not telling you. And so if you go through and you calculate your responses and the percentages one way or the other, you should always remove the refused out of that, because those people basically said, don't count me on this. And it's like, if you think about like on a school board where somebody abstains, right? Well, if you abstain from voting, you're not a part of the total that has to be counted because you've taken yourself out. That's essentially what a refusal is. And that's not how they dealt with it in the survey either, which is, not best practices.
Yeah, and that kind of begs the question: if they were able to reach 1,000 people to get them to respond, how many said no? I don't even want to take your poll, right?
Well, that's a different matter. Like, we're talking about people that have chosen to opt into the poll, but then throughout the poll have chosen to not answer certain questions one way or the other. Here's a good example. There are a lot of people, folks that we associate with, that when you ask them on a phone and they can't see you face to face, are you conservative or not? What are they going to say?
Right.
I'm not going to tell you. How do I know you're not a Fed boy? Like, who are you? You know, and there's a lot of people, and we find actually in survey research, if you might be familiar with the Trafalgar Group based in Georgia, who's done a lot of polling and has been very successful at modeling and polling conservatives, they always give, and I do the same thing in the polling that I do, I take a result and I always add 5 to 7 points on a conservative issue. And the reason for that is because conservatives, especially those on the furthest end of the conservative spectrum, are much more skeptical and much less likely to answer surveys. And if they do answer those surveys, they're much less likely to answer them honestly because of a concern of it being some sort of tool to find them and use it against them later. And so, you know, you look at these numbers, the point of that is, you look at these numbers, you add 7 points to whatever the conservative position was, and that's probably true. Now, on this particular poll, you're probably closer to 10 to 12 points because of the poor sample methodology. And if you did that, then that makes sense, right? 57 to 60% of people support school choice. That's the surveys that I've seen in Idaho. That's pretty close to what they've said.
Okay.
So this just didn't do that.
Right. Okay, well, this has been fascinating. I am so thrilled that we got to go over this. I want to have you back for more. Before I let you go, let people know where they can find you or they can get in touch with you and follow your work.
Yeah, we run pollidaho.com, so feel free to check that out if you want. And or check me out on Twitter at Brandon Durst, BrandenDurst.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Brandon, for coming on. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, everybody, that was great. Love that. We will be back right after this.
All Idaho lawmakers swear an oath to support the Idaho and U.S. constitutions. But how's that working out for you? Because not all Idaho lawmakers share the same values. That's where the Citizens Alliance of Idaho Pledge comes in. 10 statements inspired by those two founding documents that are designed to preserve our shared values. Values such as education freedom, safeguarding free speech, defending our protected right to self-defense, and being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. When a lawmaker signs the pledge, they are performing an act of political courage, accepting the challenge to be a champion for our values, and serving with political integrity. To find out if your lawmaker signed the pledge, visit idahopledge.com. Paid for by Citizens Alliance of Idaho. We ride together.
All right, welcome back. Like I said at the top of the hour here, or the bottom of the hour, top of the show, we had been paying attention to what's been going on in JFAC and whether or not they were going to move forward with these 10 special maintenance bills that would fund the government and then do the rest of the budget process how they've normally done with the line items and coming up with moving money around and getting new programs or getting rid of old programs and that sort of thing, and leaving that stuff till the end, more towards the end of the session, but at least fund the basic part of government at the top of the session with these maintenance bills. And I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit more perspective on this, because last week, the 16th, at the JFAC committee meeting where they meet to go over these topics, the meeting was led with a few words about this new process. So I want you to hear from co-chair Representative Wendy Horman, as well as co-chair Senator Scott Grow, on what they were proposing here. So let's run that clip.
As you know, this is a historic day in JFAC as we contemplate different ways of doing our business that we believe are more transparent and accountable. So historically, we make statewide decisions later in session in about week 7. We're advancing that to week 2. So we will feel free to have all the discussions. We had lots of good discussion Friday. Feel free to ask your questions again today. So with that, Mr. Co-Chair, did you have any opening comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd like to take a few minutes if I may. Thank you very much. Some of you may wonder again, why are we doing this? And our goal, one of our goals, is to reduce the redundancy of working through things that we did last year that essentially are the same this year. So rather than spending time on all of those items and have to do it throughout the session, we're doing that up front. Now, why up front? Because that gives us an opportunity to begin to move budgets to the floor. In the past, as you recall, we wait until the very end, and we've got the last 2 or 3 weeks are just 100 budgets going to both floors, and people get inundated with numbers. We're hopeful that by moving this process up and then focusing on the line items, all the things the governor's requested for this year, we can actually get into detail and have a more thorough review of his requests. And then we can begin moving budgets to the floor in a couple of weeks and throughout the session, so that both the floor as well as we in JFAC will be more thorough in our review. What's the base? Excuse me. First, let me just mention that.
Okay, so there it was, an historic day January 16, 2024 in JFAC. You heard it from them. This is you heard the clear reasons why this seems like such a fantastic idea. Transparency, accountability, and the ability to move the appropriations for these agencies further ahead in the process of their session, so that the way they can get it passed and they can focus on all of the other details throughout the rest of the session and not feel rushed at the end to pass or not pass things and worry that the government's not going to be funded by the time they adjourn. So we hope that they are working through the details on this and getting it through, because by all intents and purposes, the leadership here in JFAC is this is their baby, and they've been working on this. Both of these chairs were made co-chairs of JFAC last session. So this is their first time in this leadership role on this committee. And it's really great that they went through the first session doing what they normally do and working with a lot of the new folks in order to get to the point where they can bring in these new ideas. And that's what happened last session. There was a lot of there were a lot of seats overturned in Idaho last session. I believe the number was that there was more freshmen coming in last session than at some point in 40 or 60 years. So there was a lot of turnover, so that brought in a lot of new ideas and a lot of ideas that folks who had been there for a while now wanted to try and implement, because they found themselves in leadership positions. So we applaud their efforts on this, and we hope it moves forward with that. So great. All right. I believe we have our next guest ready, and we're running a little ahead of schedule. So if he's available, let's bring him on. Greg Pruitt is president of the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance. And we had Christy Zito on earlier this week. We also had Senator Scott Herndon on a couple of weeks ago discussing this very important bill that came out of Idaho Supreme Court case. And I wanted to bring Greg in on this because he has been a warrior for the Second Amendment in Idaho and has been behind a lot of the great things that have been going on the past few years here. So, Greg, welcome to the program. What can you tell us about this Supreme Court case, your involvement in it, and the bill going forward to kind of correct the issue here?
Yeah, so I really appreciate you having me on. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds great.
Good. Okay. Awesome. I do a podcast too, so I'm like, I think I'm good. So, yeah. But so the very short version of the story is that a public park up in Sandpoint, Idaho, was rented out by a nonprofit organization, and that nonprofit organization then banned firearms in the public park. And our contention to the Idaho Supreme Court was, well, the cities and counties aren't allowed to ban firearms in public parks. How can you give that authority to a private organization on public property to do that? Okay, and so we ended up with this big battle with the Idaho Supreme Court, and shockingly, they came down on the side of the city and the nonprofit that had rented out the park 5-0. Like, there wasn't one Supreme Court justice here in Idaho that was like, yeah, that doesn't really sound right. You know, if it's public property, it's public property, right? And so now the issue is, how do we fix this? Because right now, there's nothing that would stop, the communist mayor in Boise from giving all of the parks, or letting all of the parks be rented permanently by some, nonprofit called the Boise, Friends of Boise Parks or some bull crap, right? And then now it's privately controlled, even though it's public, and then they could just ban guns in all of the public spaces in Boise. And we're going, this is a huge problem. Like, what are we going to do here? And so I don't know that there's an easy, like, the solution to me is easy. Like, we tell the cities and counties, you can't let anyone rent, lease, or whatever public property without their knowledge of understanding that we have a right to keep and bear arms on that property no matter what. And so, is that going to hold up in court? Because right now with the Idaho Supreme Court, we barely won the abortion issue, right? It was 3-2. We were one justice away from losing that. and then we lose the gun issue. We've actually lost several gun cases up, but not us, but gun owners. There's several other cases that ISC has taken up and come down on the wrong side of. And so we have a huge problem here. Number one, we're not paying attention to our courts here in Idaho like we should. We all pay attention to the U.S. Supreme Court, but then we have this Idaho Supreme Court that we've kind of just ignored for a really long time. And then we got to figure out how to fix the issue, right? And so, there's a number of ideas floating around the Capitol, along with Senator Herndon and others, on what are we supposed to do now. There are some people who are like, well, they're basically saying it's private property as soon as it's leased out for 2 weeks. And so some people are like, let's make it so that, okay, if you're going to have a private gun-free zone during that 2 weeks, you have to put up a 6-foot barrier. You have to put up concertina wire. I mean, you have to make it a full-blown secure place, because we have a duty to protect our citizens. The other part of the bill that I think most of us will end up agreeing on is giving immunity to cities and counties and anybody renting these spaces that, look, if firearms are there, you're not responsible. Okay. It's the responsibility of the gun owner, which it should be.
Right.
And so I think that will help put a lot of them at ease on having firearms in these places, knowing that they can't get sued because a gun owner took a firearm to a park and maybe did something negligible with it. So that's kind of what the ideas that are kicking around right now.
Yeah, and I would imagine that should one of those bills pass that you feel helps alleviate this problem, that someone's probably going to challenge it and it'll end up in front of the Supreme Court again. I mean, at what point is the court can't do anything anymore? I mean, if we're passing our own laws, how do we get the courts to just stop interfering?
Right. Well, and that's basically, they legislated from the bench. That's right. Exactly. We basically do not have a preemption law anymore, because if there's a giant loophole that they can now go through, and there are some in the legislature, Republicans, who are like, yeah, I kind of agree with the Supreme Court. We should just call it private property during that time. And I'm going, what is happening here? Because I could tell you right now, if I rented out a public park in Boise and I banned somebody from the LGBT community from coming inside the park, okay, do you think that that's going to hold up in any court at any level? Of course not. It's always been okay in the courts to discriminate against gun owners. And I'm sick and tired of it, man. But here's I guess the good news to some extent is that our courts, our Supreme Court justices here are elected. Okay, they have to run for re-election at some point. So that's the good news, is that gun owners will have the ability to make changes if they really want to make changes. Now, the downside is it's really, really hard to find somebody to want to run for that, because you're going to need to find an attorney who's willing to give up probably a lot of money, because the Supreme Court justices don't make very much, right? They can make a lot more in private practice. And so it's going to be hard to find people, I think, to fill those positions. But we've got to start that long-term vision of we've got a clean house in Idaho Supreme Court.
Yeah, and the judge positions are notoriously the things on the ballot that people walk into and go, I have no idea, because they don't campaign. There's nothing behind it. Yeah. Your point about if you wanted to rent a public space and then exclude somebody or something from the space that is protected by the First Amendment, by the Constitution. Right now it feels as though that the court has said that if you did want to hold, let's say you wanted to hold a 2A event or a Republican event or something, and you said, you know what, there are no pride flags allowed. You can't wear Democrat paraphernalia, and you can't speak. You can't even say anything in the park that has anything that we disagree with. It sounds like the Supreme Court should defend your position on that if you're going to restrict someone's First Amendment right.
Correct. There was for a long time there, I wanted to do something like that. Now I don't want to discriminate against anybody. Like, I don't really care what you are, but we wanted to challenge it. We kind of wanted to test it and go, okay, well, if that's the case, that it's private property, then let's do it, and see what happens. And, obviously court battles are lengthy and expensive, and sadly, we believe we would lose.
Right.
We believe there is going to be a double standard, 100%, and we're going to get screwed in that process. But if somebody's got like I don't know, $100,000, $1 million they want to drop to test this, I'm more than happy to do it. So.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay. So with the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, what other areas are you focused on right now? Because that, that's going to go through the legislature. So you'll rally folks around where it's needed. But what else are you guys focusing on, and what do you see going ahead in the future? Because Idaho's ranking, when they rank, free gun states and that sort of thing, has been moving up 1 or 2, 3. It's in the tops there. What else do you see is a big issue?
Yeah, it was when I started back in 2012, this organization, we were 32nd in the rankings, right? We were really, really low. And so now we're up in, top 2 or 3 all the time. It was 2 for quite a while. And then it kind of, I think Wyoming or somebody jumped up above us now. So I think it's Arizona, Wyoming, Idaho, whatever. We're all brothers in this fight together. So it doesn't matter to me, although I do want to see us number 1. So we're focused on stand your ground expansion. That's one of our big issues, and has been since we passed constitutional carry years ago, is getting Idahoans what they call criminal immunity. And that's the third pillar. There's no duty to retreat, there's civil immunity, and there's criminal immunity. And criminal immunity is the easiest way to explain this is that we're trying to avoid Kyle Rittenhouse type situations, okay, where they locked him up forever and politically prosecuted this kid. And you don't have to like the kid, you don't have to like why he was there, but there was no evidence at all that he committed a crime. In fact, he did a really, really good job under the situation he was in, not shooting more people because guys were coming at him, and if those guys backed off, he didn't shoot them. He only shot the people who were physically attacking him. And so we want to avoid those types of situations where a gun owner, or it doesn't even have to be a gun. I mean, it's anytime you've defended yourself, we want to put the pressure back on the courts, on the prosecution, on the police, and say, look, you're not going to hold somebody in here indefinitely. If they've defended themselves or they feel that they have, within 14 days, they get to have a pretrial hearing that go to before the judge and say, what evidence do you have? You can't just keep holding these people in here indefinitely. Show us the evidence that you have right now. And they don't have to have the whole case, but they've got to have something other than just, we think he did it, right? And so that forces the government to try and prove some sort of guilt initially, rather than putting somebody in prison for a long time. And then the other big part of the bill is, if that prosecutor is going to move forward with a trial and you are found innocent by a jury of your peers for a reason of self-defense, if that's the reason that the jury cites, the judge can award attorney's fees. Okay, look, taking somebody's life is something none of us want to do. I don't know any gun owner that's like, yeah, I want to go kill a bad guy. Like, I don't want to, some guy breaks into my house, I really don't want to kill him, right? I just don't want him to break into my house, but I'm going to have to defend my family if that's the case. And so, I don't care who you are. If you're a normal human being, taking somebody's life, even if it's, in self-defense, it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life, right? That you had to kill somebody. Like, that's not something anybody wants to do. And so, with these political prosecutions, not only is your life ruined because you had to take another life potentially, but you're also financially ruined, right? A freaking murder trial is extremely expensive, the most expensive trial you're going to go through. And so now you're financially ruined because of some political prosecution. And so this says, look, the judge can go, you're going to get some attorney's fees back from the government for putting you through this. And the state of Washington has that, for crying out loud. So how the state of Idaho doesn't have it is still kind of mind-blowing to me.
Right. Okay. Well, Greg, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I know your organization is one of the top-notch one in the state, and people love what you're doing. And I'm so glad we get to highlight what you're doing and what you're working on. We've been showing the website on here, but tell people how we can follow you, how we can support you, and then we'll make sure to have you back as well.
Yeah, if you go to idahosaa.org, you'll see the website there. We actually just relaunched this yesterday.
Oh, wow. Good timing.
Yeah, we've done a lot of changes, so that's really, really good timing. We wanted to give it more of an Idaho feel, like that guy right there, right? Just out hunting, having a great time, and then the other gal up there with a scary, scary rifle, right? So, we'd love to have gun owners join up. That's the only way that we can do this. We've got a lot of fights coming. We're going to be heavily, heavily involved in the ranked choice voting fight, because that is a major threat to gun owners and your gun rights. And so we're going to be heavily involved in that fight coming up here shortly.
Okay, great. And also, everybody, Greg is also co-host of the Freedom Bros podcast with Dustin Hurst, so make sure you tune into that. Greg, come back again and have a great one.
No problem. Thanks again, brother.
All right, take care. Wow, fantastic work. Okay, we will be right back with some more fantastic guests.
There's a saying in Idaho, Esto perpetua. It is forever. But the truth is, nothing lasts forever. Not without a fight. The Gem State is ours to fight for. It is ours to win. For life and liberty. For honesty and integrity. We ride together.
Okay, welcome back. There's a big fight going on in the state of Idaho. And it is between this whole notion that we need open primaries, that somehow voters are being disenfranchised from being able to have a voice in every single political party's decision making. In Idaho right now, we have closed primaries, which means if you want to vote for if you want to vote for a candidate in a specific party, you have to affiliate with that party by a certain date, and then you'd be allowed to vote in that particular party. There's a couple of nuances in the laws here in Idaho, but generally speaking, if you want to vote in a closed primary, you have to affiliate that. There are some states that have open primaries, meaning you can just show up and pick whoever you want to vote in, whichever party you want to do. So, we'll get into it in a second, because there was a huge thing that happened in New Hampshire this week that kind of showed us exactly what the ramifications of an open primary are versus a closed primary. I'm going to bring in our friend here, Mark Luca. Mark is a longtime political activist in the Republican Party. And as far as also being a GOP delegate, I think twice a GOP delegate going to the conventions. I'll ask him to clarify his bona fides here in a minute. But Mark, welcome to the program. Can you give us a little bit of your background in terms of your activism, because I think you're going to offer us a great perspective on what we should be focused on here in Idaho.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be with you. Really love everything that the Citizens Alliance is doing in this Idaho Signal is just a great next step. So thanks for putting it on.
Well, thank you, sir.
As far as me, political involvement, I started getting involved in Oregon in 2002 or so with the Young Republicans, and worked on a number of campaigns, ended up working in the legislature for 7 members of the Oregon legislature. And also served as you said, a delegate twice to the Republican convention, once in 2004 and once in 2008. The first time as a pledged Bush delegate, and the second time as a Ron Paul delegate. I also served as a county chair and the state chair of the Young Republicans, and ever since have just kept involved in one way or the other. And currently, it's more so in the background as an informal advisor when anybody asks. But certainly, as things are heating up in Idaho, it's definitely time for all of us that have something to offer to get in the fight. So glad.
Well, amen to that. Yeah,
whatever I can offer.
Yeah, well, amen. Exactly, because I mean, as a taking an advisory role when we're looking at the landscape of what's been going on in our country, I wanted to point out, in New Hampshire, in the New Hampshire primary, they dove into the numbers of the people who showed up to vote for Donald Trump or for Nikki Haley, and I don't have the exact number in front of me, but somewhere in the vicinity of about 74% of and they have an open, they don't have, it's not closed, so anybody can show up and vote for these people. Right. But the folks that voted for Donald Trump, there was about, I think, a 73 or in the low 70s% of them were registered Republicans. And then on the flip side, the folks that voted for Nikki Haley that gave her such a strong second place finish. She had, her voters were independents and Democrats, and she had maybe in the 20s, the mid 20s or so of that were registered Republicans. And so when you really dive into those numbers, you can see that the overwhelming majority of folks, that are supporting, Nikki Haley, at least in New Hampshire, weren't Republicans. And that's kind of the thing that I'm looking at here in Idaho is the open and closed primary. What is your perspective on whether or not open primaries are actually the way to go?
So specifically to New Hampshire, 34% of the people who voted in that primary identified as liberal. And of those, 75% of them voted for Nikki Haley. So it just shows you that it's a deliberate attempt to water down the primary process. And it's part of a much broader attempt by the Marxist left to take control of our election process and make it easier to cheat, basically. So open primaries are one very important part of that, where you can do what used to be where you would do ballot stuffing starting back in the 1800s, where you would put a bunch of people over in a state and they'd all register and vote in that state and then all go home. It's very similar to that, but open primaries are just one part of it. You also have the extended voting times through early voting and vote by mail that allow a huge opportunity to cheat. Ranked choice voting is another way. Resistance to voter ID laws, electronic voting, and same-day registration. All of these things combine to allow a cheating to occur at a much greater rate. And the real issue that people need to be aware of is it all seems to benefit one party, doesn't it? GOP voters and other people, even liberal voters that are very committed voters, are registered way ahead of time. They don't need to register the same day because they're already engaged on the issue and they have a principled position on it, and they want to fight for that through either just the ballot box or through activism. But the problem comes when you have the low information voter that is completely oblivious to the millions of dollars of political ads swirling around them. And then someone picks them up and says, hey, let's go vote. Oh, I'm not registered. That's fine. We'll do it when we get there. That person tends to vote to the left consistently. And the left knows that. If those people were voting on the right consistently, you can bet that we would have paper ballots, one-day voting, and you would show two forms of ID when you went in there. So, right. so the fact that it benefits only the left primarily is the reason why we have all of these things. And open primaries are a key component of that.
They are, and this push right now for this initiative, people are gathering signatures to have an open primary as well as a ranked choice voting, is being pushed by, surprise, surprise, everybody on the left, and some co-belligerents who are sick of seeing liberty thrive within the right sphere of the equation. Mark, we're going to take a quick break. I want to have you back because I also want to dive into some of the dirty things that go on behind the scenes and your experience there, being involved in, not in the dirty aspect, but being aware of it in your long career in activism here. We'll be right back after this.
All Idaho lawmakers swear an oath to support the Idaho and U.S. constitutions. But how's that working out for you? Because not all Idaho lawmakers share the same values. That's where the Citizens Alliance of Idaho pledge comes in. 10 statements inspired by those two founding documents that are designed to preserve our shared values. Values such as education freedom, safeguarding free speech, defending our protected right to self-defense, and being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. When a lawmaker signs the pledge, they are performing an act of political courage, accepting the challenge to be a champion for our values, and serving with political integrity. To find out if your lawmaker signed the pledge, visit idahopledge.com. Paid for by Citizens Alliance of Idaho. We ride together.
All right, we're back. Mark Luca is joining us here, and Mark, I wanted to get into some of the news that that came out this week. Carrie Lake released some audio that was recorded apparently 10 or 11 months ago, where she was approached by the head of the party in Arizona, offering a bribe for her to stay out of the race, for Senate. She's running for Senate in Arizona. And he phrased it as like, oh, we don't want you to leave. We just want you to pause. We just want you to take a pause for 2 years,
Right.
And it just confirmed for so many of us who don't necessarily have these types of conversations or around, the big powers that be, that this stuff is real and it goes on. And even when Carrie Lake last night announced that people had asked, oh, why did you wait so long for this to come out? And she said, I've actually been talking about this in my speeches for the past 10 months. Just nobody's picked up on it and asked me anything about it. She literally said, I was bribed today or yesterday, and here's what happened. So it's almost like, we all know content is king. So when you got video or audio, that really makes the story go. But what have you experienced anything like this? Have you ever seen or heard stories throughout your career in Republican politics or even Democrat politics of this stuff going on? And what's your take on this?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. This before I get into me, the really disgusting part with Carrie Lake is anybody even asking who was it that asked this state chair to have her take a pause? And that's the bigger issue. I mean, the state chair has resigned, but he's not the problem. He was the messenger. And we don't know who it was. Who is this power that asked her to name her price to get out of the race? That is the really not shocking if you've been in the business for a while, but it certainly is the biggest affront to our liberties. I've experienced it. We all saw it, I think, very well in the way the Democrats disenfranchised Bernie Sanders in 2 successive elections, so much so that you had even party insiders blowing the whistle on it, like Donna Brazile, for example, who you couldn't get more insider than Al Gore's campaign manager, and she blew the whistle on this. And so that sort of thing happens all the time, unfortunately. For me, when I was a delegate for Ron Paul in 2008, that came about because the Ron Paul movement and the Tea Party movement had just started to come into the party, and I had been there for a while, working to restore a constitutional mindset, the constitutional republic. And when those folks came into the party, there was this real resistance on the part of the party establishment, as looking at them as kind of the great unwashed. And so when McCain's campaign actually called around and wanted party establishment people to run as Ron Paul delegates and then go to the convention and switch their vote and vote for McCain and not follow their pledge. So I was reached out to and asked if I would be one of those who would run as a Ron Paul delegate. What they didn't know was that I had been following Ron Paul for years and was already a fan, in the sense of he was the only one talking about restoring constitutional liberty and thinking, well, hey, we have this constitution, why don't we try that rather than this system, this swamp that we have going. So I was already following him. And so I ran and I did it, and I got on as a Ron Paul agent, a Ron Paul delegate, and I promised that I would vote for Ron Paul, and I did that on the convention floor. But there was a great deal of pressure, even on the part to our state chair. At the convention, there was a meeting of the state chairs, and they asked them to not report when you go to the floor and you say, Idaho, the gem state, the great, puts this many votes for this person and this many for this. They wanted them to not mention the Ron Paul votes, or even count the Ron Paul votes as McCain votes. And so This kind of thing has been happening for a long time, and it's really sad. I mean, if we just call balls and strikes and let people actually have the democratic system that people have died for, we would have a lot more liberty, but there would be people in power that would not be able to control the strings of it, and they'd be upset. So,
yeah,
that stuff happens.
Yeah, I'm I'm very encouraged to hear that story, though, that there were quite a few Ron Paul delegates coming from Oregon, even if it was 2008. I don't know what they'd rally for now. But can you explain a little bit, though, the process of becoming a delegate? Because when that happens, we see we're about to have a caucus here in Idaho, March 2nd, right? The Republicans are having their caucus on March 2nd to assign all of the delegates to a particular candidate. And right now, I think all of the candidates who applied to be on the ballot in Idaho have since dropped out, except for Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. So should there be delegates that want to fight that out, after the winner is declared, what is the process there? How do you identify and how do you choose somebody to be the delegate and go to the convention, saying I'm here for this person. I'm not going to change my vote. I mean, how do you get to that point?
So each state would have a different process slightly. But generally what happens is the primary or caucus is going to determine how many delegates a particular candidate gets. I'm as an aside, I'll say that I'm very excited to see what our chairwoman has done in bringing this caucus about after the attempt to move our primary to an irrelevant date. But so you will go through that process, and a delegate count will be assigned based on the winner and or the number of votes that any candidate gets. And then from that point, the party's process takes over, and the party can have a different method, but usually there's a convention and people run for delegate, saying I would be a pledged Trump delegate, and this is me, and I want to represent you in the convention. And then the party members will vote. Maybe it's at a state convention, it might be in regional conventions. It just depends on how that state does it. And there's delegates and alternate delegates assigned. For every delegate, there's also an alternate in case that delegate chooses not to go or can't serve for some reason. And then they go to the convention and they vote for their candidate. You're supposed to be pledged. This is also based on convention rules, but you're pledged to vote for your candidate on the first ballot. And if it goes to a second ballot, then you're a free agent and can vote for whoever. And in my opinion, this is how the Democrats are going to get Joe Biden off the ballot. It'll be through that delegate process. Nobody has to run in the primary and have money spent against him and all of that. If they get to the convention and he bows out, either because he's criminally charged or declared non compos mentis, then suddenly they have no candidate. And what are they going to do? All of those delegates that were pledged to Biden are now free agents to vote for whoever they want. And it gives the party deniability as to why they didn't choose Kamala Harris. They could say, well, the delegates didn't choose it.
Right.
And the Democrat Party, unlike the Republican Party, the Democrats have added a lot of what's called super delegates. And these are just longtime party loyalists, Congress people, state chairs, these kinds of people that are going to vote for however the party tells them to vote. That's how they rigged it for Hillary Clinton, by the way.
Right.
So that system is still in place, and they can choose whoever they want, and that candidate steps in late in the game with no repercussion. Now they're a fresh face, and you have a month or two to be able to fight against them and try to get their record out there. So that's kind of the way it smells at this point.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I love getting into the weeds on this stuff. We're going to have to wrap it up here. I want to have you back and keep tabs on this. This has been a great conversation. So thank you, Mark, for joining us. Anything you want to promote? Anything you want to shout out? Are you on social media at all?
No, actually, I'll be the rare guest that doesn't have anything to promote other than just go and fight for liberty.
There you go. That's what we need. The guys who just, hang in the back, give out good advice and tell the other people to go out and fight. So that's great. I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right, folks. That was fun getting into the weeds on all that. And hopefully I know I learned some stuff. So that was great. Once again, we are keeping track of what's going on in JFAC and that budget process. So you can find us on our social media. Citizens Alliance of Idaho is on all the social media platforms. And so we'll be keeping tabs there. I'm on X too at True Matt Edwards, so you can follow me there. I often post on X what's going on. But more importantly, IdahoSignal.com. You see it there on your screen. If you would like to support, head over there and drop us a line, give us a message, give us some words of encouragement, maybe a few shekels or a few pesos, whatever you got lying around would also help keep the show powered and the signal strong. All right, we're working on those taglines. Equalizing the narrative, that's what we're doing here at Idaho Signal. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back another day, probably tomorrow. Take care.
Bill, I think it puts a stake in the ground that says we have a sovereign right to protect what's ours.